I remember I heard feedback from men that were like, you were beautiful and powerful in a way that was like, you were so sexy, but it was like, they even were like, it was different. And I remember just having this imprint of this moment, like there is something here around me and also what I could start to see in other women.
Welcome to Liberated Lyfe podcast. Today, I'm here with my friend Katie O'Connor. Katie is a mentor and facilitator who specializes in relational healing. She works through a feminine perspective to assist both men and women along their journeys. Welcome, Katie.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
Good to have you. We've been talking about doing this for a little bit. Katie and I met through a program called Ascension Leadership Academy, which is an emotional intelligence and leadership training. And I would say that, I know for me, that really launched my freedom journey. You know, like living a liberated life is not easy. ALA, which is the abbreviation, what we call it, really like launched me into that life. So to start out, I would love for you to just share a little bit about yourself, your background, the ways in which you live a liberated life yourself, anything that comes to mind like that.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I would say actually my journey also really began with ALA. So I went through it in early 2018. And, you know, at the time I was living in Toronto, Canada. I was working for a startup with 12 dudes and me. And it was in tech, so classic arrangement. And I really liked it. Like it was like a really great place to be. But I had always had sort of a like side curiosity around relationships and sex. And, you know, through my own journey, I had been in like at that point I'd been out of it, but a 5.5-year relationship through my 20s that probably like should have left if I was really following the truth, like 2 or 3 years before I did, honestly. It was comfortable. It was good, you know, but there was like a lot of fear, a lot of like me staying because it was easy. Mm-hmm. And in that there was like, I was not having sex. I was not desiring sex. And I was in this place of like the chicken or the egg and kind of looking at it with myself. And so, you know, I had left that relationship and started kind of in my own exploration. And I found myself in this tech company. And then I started ALA. And it was through that journey where I think I really met many parts of myself that felt like, oh, she's been here all along, like, holy shit. And had an experience that I could really actually see and feel the power of my liberation as a woman, as like a sexual woman, as a sensual being that was in a totally different like flavor than I was used to feeling sexuality. Like it was like, I remember I heard feedback from men that were like, you were beautiful and powerful in a way that was like, you were so sexy, but it was like, they even were like, it was different. And I remember just having this imprint of this moment, like there is something here around me and also what I could start to see in other women. And I started to really feel my leadership in that journey. I also started to see a lot of patterns with my current partner at the time, which was its own sort of personal development journey. I was with a new partner and for about 4.5 years who struggled with addiction. Mm-hmm. So all my stuff, you know, really opened with that as well. And so during my process, I decided I was going to move to San Diego and follow this call that, like, you know, I had never really known much about coaching or anything kind of in this world. And so I didn't know what it would look like, but I just decided I need to leave the environment that only knows me in this context and go to a place where I can really discover who's here and be around people who are willing to meet whatever version, you know, comes forth. Mm-hmm. So made the move in January 2019, and started doing a lot of volunteer coaching with ALA, started a deeper spiritual journey with myself, and then started my coaching practice that was really like very kind of Like I look back in like some cringe moments of like very mindset-y and like 3 steps to, you know, great relationships and all this stuff. Meanwhile, I'm like dating an addict and having so many fucking things coming up. And so it was a really interesting time where I was learning a lot, but also like wasn't really embodying the depth at which I think that could have held the work that I was actually doing. And so that's actually kind of where the journey with the feminine came in, because it was about 2020 where I started to really feel like the deeper thing, like I was like coaching myself in and out of everything in my mind, and things were not sticking in the body. And so I had an experience actually with ayahuasca, my one and only journey in the middle of 2020, that really opened some channels with my body and started to have me really feel like, holy shit, I have this like engine room especially as a woman with so much wisdom and power and intelligence that I have not been accessing. I have not actually been allowing myself to feel, which is why things are not like sticking in my relationships and in my life in the way that I'd really like thought was possible. And so it really shifted my orientation to how can I tend to her, which then opened up, you know, this whole kind of like 4-year journey of like really descending into my body as a woman and trusting the truths of what emerges without trying to like fix it, because that kind of personal development mindset we can kind of hijack it with our egos, right? Like there's so many problems to fix. There's a issue here. And it's been a real sort of unraveling in that. And I've spent a lot of time actually working just with women these past few years in sort of the same capacity, and have just recently come back to, well, really it's the first time in my practice I've been really working with men and women together. And so it's bringing kind of this work into a relational dynamic, but not around let's fix the relationship problems. And like, because I've actually been so resistant to working with couples for a long time, because I actually think the journey for men and women is really different, and it's actually quite individual. And so much of what's happening in a relationship is actually a symptom of the energy in both. So it's interesting because I've just kind of cracked a code, I feel like, where I found a way to create a journey that honors the context of a relationship, but still is very personalized in the journey for men and women. And it's been really beautiful to be with.
Yeah. Wow. There's a lot there.
I know. Big story.
Well, and it reminded me of this post that I read that you had on Facebook. It was maybe a month or 2 ago, where I think you went on a walk and you ran into a guy who was maybe homeless or something. And I remember you talking about like really grounding in your body in that experience, and like sitting with him and being with him and being like fully present with him. And I remember when you referenced that feeling of like that deep, like, I don't know if it was like the womb space or like kind of combined with like the root, where I don't think I have full access there, because I was like, I can conceive of what she's talking about, but I don't think that I felt that. Mm-hmm. And so I don't know if you're open to it, I would love to hear more about like what you experienced in that ayahuasca journey that like activated that.
Yeah. Although it was such a beautiful experience with that man. Oh my goodness.
And you can share about that too if you want to get because I'm probably butchering it. Yeah, because
I actually think it really plays into one of the things culturally that we're seeing between men and women, of this like lack of safety that a lot of women feel, and how our journey with our bodies is actually the antidote to that. It's not men
on them
being better. Right. You know, of course, this is where people go like, well, men need to. And of course, right? It's like, of course, men should not be hurting. Like, of course, there is this place for men. And as a woman, the way in which we relate with ourselves and carry ourselves and have access to really what it is to me is like, it's like, do you have all your antennas on, right? Because we have abilities to feel things and sense things beyond the like 5 senses that we're taught. And that is like our superpower. But a lot of it has been really dormant because we're never taught about it, right? And then we live in a world that really values a lot of the more masculine qualities, which then we have no opportunity to actually like begin a relationship with that energy. And so for me, I think what the big gift was with ayahuasca was that it was like everything got heightened in such a way that like the way that I was purging. I think it was the second night, you know, everyone talks about ayahuasca. It's like you're puking, you're shitting, you know.
Yeah.
First night I did have a purge, but the second night I started purging with my movement. And so I never had to have the like, whoa, it was like, I started to actually feel in such a tangible way that like my body can be doing so much more. And so it was like for that period of time, an amplification turning on of all these sort of like extra senses and these like turbines that I didn't know were there. And so when I like finished, and I think one of the big important things when anyone does sort of like a very peak experience is you can have that and then come right back in to where you were.
Yeah.
And so it's like, how do you start to like actually integrate that? And so my practice became, how do I create that and honor that truth, even though I can't always feel it in the same way now that I'm home, but how do I start to cultivate that? And so that's when I created sort of a embodied movement practice with myself. And I consistently just like let my body start to lead me and created a practice where she always led, which really started to kind of translate into my life. And that's what I started bringing into the work with women, because it's like, how often do we actually let our minds just go to the back and say, even like in an exercise or a yoga class, you're telling your body what poses to do.
Yeah.
So this was like a total reorientation. And then in 2021 was when I entered the field of who I would call my teacher, Perry Chase. And she really teaches on the like energetics of the feminine. And she really works with the pussy as an access point to that. And so she actually has a clitoral stroking practice, which is a guided meditation practice. And it's not pleasure oriented, like so much of what's in sort of that world of like, follow your pleasure. Like it's very much about, can you actually be with the most powerful source of your energy as a woman in a neutral, curious, devotional way versus trying to get somewhere, trying to extract from it, trying to feel something, which is like, and in that you start to also like heat up your energy as a woman and your shit flushes up and you kind of like start to actually see these patterns that you probably couldn't see just in the mindset world. And so that also started to really bring me down into my body over time. So it was actually quite a long, and I'm still descending. Like I can still feel there's depths. Like it's actually a slow burn, which I also think is why a lot of people don't love the journey, because they're like, I want it now. Like I want the big awakening.
Yeah.
But yeah, so with that man, like I think one of the things for me reflecting on that, I was in Barton Springs in Austin, and it was dry and empty. So I was like walking along the river bed and there was no one around. And this homeless guy kind of like appeared out of nowhere, started talking to me. And for some reason, I just like really trusted. I was like, okay, didn't really want to like chat with some dude, but ended up starting to talk to him. And I remember like really the biggest difference was that I felt so present with my body and my energy that I like was able to feel him and his energy. I was able to like check out my surroundings to be like, if I needed to run, where would I run? Right? It's like a reasonable thing. I wasn't like sucked into the moment. And so it was like there was an awareness that I was able to hold out here without losing what was here. So I wasn't like in a hypervigilance. I wasn't in a shutdown place, which is actually like the least safe mode a woman could be in, right? Being hypervigilant and afraid is where we have like very little access to feeling the truth. And it was like, I trusted him. I felt something really pure in him. And even when he was definitely like, he smoked meth in front of me, offered me some, I was like, I'm good. But like, and it was hilarious. I thought he was like offering me like weed. He's like, smoke? And I was like, no, what is that, weed? He's like, no, ice. And I was like, what's that? He's like, meth. I'm like, oh, thank you so much, sir. No, thank you. But he like smoked it, and I could see he definitely had some mental health stuff and also drugs. So he would sometimes slip into this sort of paranoia, and he would all of a sudden be like, you stole my phone from me in like, where was it? San Antonio. I recognize you. And I could feel that. And at no point did I ever go like, oh shit. I just was like, no, that wasn't me. Like I held this real frequency of love that actually brought him back, you know? And so it was such a magical little like dojo to feel all of that and to be in it. And then when I left it, I was like, woo, like I just went to a whole fucking other dimension for like 90 minutes. And it was amazing.
And he probably like, it seems like it was meant to be. Like he needed that from you. It's like you were his little spirit guide for a second, and he was yours too. And it was like,
Totally.
it happens sometimes. I've experienced that too. And it's always like it's a trip. Yeah. Oh,
Totally.
well, and our intention today is to talk about boundaries. So I feel like this is the perfect window for that conversation. Naturally, like in coaching people in relationships, like boundaries is a lot of that, I'm sure. But I'm curious what your perspective is on like, what is a boundary? How do you perceive of them? What are they?
So I think that one of the most important pieces around boundaries is that like a boundary is felt, it's not known by the mind, right? It's actually like it almost feels like a line in the sand energetically in which you can feel if inside of it is like a no and outside of it is a yes. And I think one of the things that kind of gets missed sometimes is people start to think like what a boundary should be based on like the thing they're seeing or the perspective or the situation. And yet they're allowing certain things because their energetic boundary is almost a lot closer. Their no is actually not where they think it should be. And so they're like, it should be here, but yet I'm allowing here. And the reality is the boundary is where you have to feel where your boundary is. And usually the indicator, like you actually can't really discover a boundary until it's crossed, in my experience. That's actually how you learn, is when you start to experience, the most common thing is like resentment. If I start to experience resentment or a shrinking of myself, there's a boundary here that I get to then like look at and identify first, right? That's the sign. It's like, what actually is the boundary? Because I'm feeling something that doesn't feel good. And sometimes we can actually work through the thing and not have to have the boundary there. Or we go, okay, I need to redirect to something else. And I need to have this line, which is not necessarily like a wall, right? I think that's the other thing. And like when I really think about boundaries, and I think this is a pretty unique perspective that has really helped me. And I don't know when I started seeing it this way, but like a boundary is always in service to something, right? It's actually not about self. It's not about protecting me. It's like, if I believe that the people in my life deserve the most open, generous version of me, then anything that comes in to impact that is where I actually need to create a boundary to redirect so that I can stay open, right? It's actually in service to all. It's in service to all my relationships. And I think a lot of people get stuck with boundaries because they think it's like about me and it feels selfish, and it's this whole self conversation. And it's like, no, we actually got to zoom out to be like, what's the greater picture of like the most aligned relationship between me and this person in this moment? That makes sense.
Yeah. No, I love that perspective, that it's more of a feeling than like a mental construct. I think it's Teal Swan who, when she talks about boundaries, she's like, it's not a wall or a fence. It's like more of a rule of engagement. And those can change based on the circumstances and based on the people and that sort of thing. And I think just, I don't know if it's part of just like being a woman or just my own personal felt experiences, it's just been very difficult for me to learn and set boundaries in my life because I feel like I naturally have this really open, generous energy, and that's how I am. That is my essence. That's how I want to be. And so I always feel like when I do have to like protect myself, it just like takes so much energy that I'm like, why can't we all just be telepathic and not have to do that? Right.
Yeah.
But we're not there yet. So like that's been a learning experience. And I think at one point I was conflating, like, you know, say you have a relationship with someone in your life that's not serving you anymore and you actually need to cut off that connection. I got really hung up on, it's like, I don't ever want to cut off connection with anybody, ever, ever. Like, no matter how bad they wrong me, like, that's like the last thing I want to do for whatever reason. But I think I realized like cutting off connection isn't the same as cutting off love, right? Like you can still love a person and not be connected to them. And that was like a weird perspective
Yeah.
shift.
Well, actually, it's really funny because I think the biggest reason that we don't put boundaries in is because we prioritize connection over love.
Yeah.
We want the connection because it feels better, right? It feels scary to our nervous system to lose connection,
Yes.
even if it's the most loving thing to do.
Right.
This is the piece that if we are sourcing so much connection from outside of ourselves and don't have this deep sort of like internal self connection and connection, honestly, to God or some greater source, it feels so like scary, especially because as a kid, right? Like losing connection meant death when we were younger.
Yeah.
And so we end up keeping connection when it's actually not serving love, because to me love is in service to all. It's in service to the highest, which if someone is operating from like a really unclean place in patterns and addiction and anything that is like not, you know, it's not serving them. Like if you connected with their soul, what would their soul say to you right there? Like the human version of me not being so cool. If you continue to keep connection because that feels more comfortable, it's like the soul's like, bro, we need someone to kind of smack us, right? Like the only way we learn is when our life starts to point to a deep place of like, what am I doing here? Like I'm losing people because of something.
Yeah.
And to me as a woman, it's like, especially with men, you know, there's this whole like, I'm so tired of teaching men all the time, right? Like, why do we have to fucking teach them? And it's like, it's like, because you're looking at teaching as if you're like a fucking school teacher. You're like, I don't want to teach them that 1 + 1 = 2. And it's like, no, you don't have to do that. You just have to have a really clear requirement on what's required to be in this kind of connection with you. Yeah. And if it's not there, you simply don't allow it. And you can do that so lovingly. And that is how they learn, right? Like our no as a woman is the teacher. We don't have to paint them a fucking graph on like how to then meet us. We can create invitations, right? We can give loving feedback or make requests. But I think so many women get tired because it's like, oh, I've chosen a man who actually doesn't meet a lot of what I want. And then I'm trying to rearrange him without losing him to become what I want. And that's really fucking exhausting. Yeah, it really is.
Well, and then you have the attachment, which complicates things because I feel like in that dynamic, everyone learns better when there's less attachment in the first place, to where it's like, we're just learning and engaging all the time and there's no expectation, right?
Yeah.
How else, when you have that filter on it, it just makes it more complicated, which is easier said than done, right? Like once there's the attachment there, it's like,
it really like, you know, ups the ante of what you need to, which is why I'm such an advocate for women to really be in the refinement of their sort of like field and boundaries and clarity before you get too far. Because sometimes when you're in, and especially if it's like a wounded pattern that really locked you in with that person, it is very hard to break in such a way that you can have sort of the necessary deaths within the relationship that could transform it. Right. So like for me, that was like basically what happened with me and my ex, was that we came into it, like there was so much real love and like amazingness sort of like at a soul level and at a heart level with each other. But our humans had a lot of patterns that really like entangled in. And I wasn't able to really meet the depths of myself in a way that I needed to while in the relationship. It was like I tried everything I could not to let it go, when really the truest thing was like, you need to fucking let it go for his sake and yours. Yeah.
I've had that happen too a few different times. And it's always like, I spend so much time arguing with myself about it before actually doing it that, you know, it's just such a process. And it's so hard when you really, really deeply love someone that you have to disconnect from. Like, gosh, it just keeps happening. But it probably always will, you know, I don't know. Did you notice in your relationship with him, I think you said he was an addict, did you see like codependent patterns in yourself? Is that part of what brought you to this work? Yeah.
It was like, it's so funny because I mean, I saw codependent patterns, and right from the beginning, it was like they all flared. But what was, I think, really the humbling thing for me coming out of it that I couldn't see while I was in it was that I was just as much of an addict as him. Yeah. And my addiction was to connection and control.
Yeah.
Right. Like he was my drug.
Yes.
Alcohol and weed were his drug.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it was great. Right. And you're like, oh yeah, how is, this isn't actually right. Sustainable. And I think that, you know, codependency is an addiction.
Yes.
And I think that's like, it can be really valuable to actually see. To me, addiction is simply like an energetic pattern. It is a consumptive pattern that holds you instead of being in creation and with the truth. And so I remember, because a lot of what showed up in my judgment of him or my frustration in my codependency, when I was in that like real sort of vortex, you know, I would be so frustrated with his addiction. Right. And I think the hard piece was that sometimes I didn't know how, I remember saying this, like, I don't know how to place him in my mind, because like, if he didn't have an addiction and just behaved that way, he'd be an asshole. But because he has the addiction, it was like, I didn't know where to put my blame, which is all a distraction from me. It's like, it doesn't actually matter if it's him or the booze or the pain or the whatever. That's actually not even my business. And so I had a lot of judgment around his addiction. It was almost this like scapegoat. And then when I started to see that like, you cannot actually be in a relationship with an addict and not be an addict yourself, it was like, fuck.
Yeah.
Okay. And then what actually came with that was a very deep compassion for him. Because what I experienced in our breakup was very much the like, and when we, at this point he started dating someone quite soon after we broke up, which was like, really God was being like, we're just going to give it to you all right now, which was also like my deepest fear. That was one of the fears.
How'd that happen?
And also quite a pattern of what an addict would do. Right. And it's like, so, you know, everything plays out actually as it is showing. And we had been still in a little bit of connection, like we had breaks, but there was some actual healthy kind of like unwinding and processing in the breakup. But I remember there was a point at which I knew like, I can't reach for him anymore. And as soon as I really like put that, like I felt like a fucking fiend. Like there was one day, I remember it was like the day before Mother's Day. And I was like, couldn't watch a movie. I was like, couldn't fucking function because I was like in withdrawal.
Yep.
That was the moment it hit me that I was like, oh my God, number one, this is probably because he wasn't always actively, you know, drinking. He would go through periods of sobriety, but the addiction was kind of still, the monster was still in there. And I had this moment, I'm like, this is what he fucking experienced in himself all the time. No wonder he couldn't show up for me. Like, are you fucking kidding? Like how I'm feeling right now, could I be any close to being like a loving, supportive partner to someone? And so it was this actual deep guilt that came of like all the times that I had blamed him and really feeling that and going, holy fuck, and how unloving that was. Really was like a deep sort of portal for me to feel.
I feel that a lot. At one point, I think it was during ALA, actually, they had us kind of go through all of our relationships and draw themes that, transcend throughout each relationship. And at one point I identified, every single relationship I've had has been with an addict in some form or another, and realizing that, that means I'm an addict, not in the way that we necessarily think, but like a relationship addict or like codependent, and when you were speaking about that, I was thinking about how I've gone to only a couple Al-Anon meetings, but what always sticks out to me is, their emphasis on it's not about the addict. It's not about what they're doing or they're not doing. You got to pull the focus back to yourself and take care of yourself, regardless of what they do or they don't do. And it's just such a beautiful way to like take your power back and to still be in a relationship with people who are struggling with addiction, because we're all struggling with addiction, it turns out, in one way or another, it seems like. And then it also reminded me lately, I've been kind of researching the topic of limerence. I don't know if you've done much with that, but it sounds like you have some experience with that, which I don't know how to explain that for people who don't know what that is, but basically like the tendency of when you get into kind of a relationship with someone, whether real or unreal, you start fixating on them in your head and having obsessive thoughts about them and who they are and the future. And it's like living in fantasy land.
Totally.
Not in reality. And I've looked back on like, just like my childhood, I think that's something that I did to just avoid negative feelings. As a kid, I would just like go to fantasy world. And now I'm like, oh shit, I'm still doing that. Yeah.
Totally. That was a huge pattern of mine, fantasy land, and wait, you said one thing that I'll actually touch on this, the first thing first, and then come back to fantasy. But the thing that, back to boundaries, sort of how this sort of like really applies to boundaries. And one of the things that I think is also really important is that a boundary is a true neutral, like standard for yourself in that moment. And a lot of people feel like there's a lot of people who kind of sometimes use boundaries as like a very forceful thing, right? Like, it's my no. It's like, you can't do this. And one, that's actually like behavior control, right? So like a boundary is actually something that you decide is basically, is this okay in my space or not? Am I okay with this? If this is a no for me and this continues, I remove myself. It's not about, I need you to stop drinking. It's that, for him, it was like, when you're going to drink, I'm not going to be around you.
Right.
That's a really like, and because it requires you to actually fucking back it, right? And follow through. It's like, how much are you willing to serve the garden of your life, right? And how much are you willing to protect that energy and tend to that energy?
And it's about me. It's not about
you. No, it's not about you.
But
yeah, if we're not hanging out every day because you're drinking all the time, well, we don't really have a relationship. But that takes into account and actually gives someone sovereign choice, right? Like you say, this is the invitation to be in my space and what I need. And again, it can change all the time. There were times where I was okay with him drinking because I actually had to be in that exploration of like, is this my judgment about his drinking or is this truly not okay? And I went months where I actually allowed it to like feel the truth so that I could eventually be like, that's just a no. And then I could back it because there was no like, well, maybe it should be okay. It was like, no, we did it. We actually felt it. I'm here, which is how when I think about relationships now, one of my sort of standards or I don't want to say requirements, but like anyone who is in active addiction is a no for me. Whether it's like, the last guy I was with was like hape, right? Which is like a spiritual little like grounding thing, but it's tobacco. And it's like, he was using it like 10 times a day to like find a grounding moment.
Woo, that's a lot.
It's a lot. And like it, it didn't affect affect us in the time that we were exploring. Like, it didn't bother me that he did it. I actually had no feelings that he did it. But to me, it was a flag of a deeper energetic pattern that lived in his system, that in order for me to start building with you, in order for me to be in creation with you, which is what I feel like a committed relationship is, that actually doesn't have room. And so it was like a really loving, clear thing. And what happened one night actually was, I don't really drink anymore at all, which just kind of faded out over the last couple of years. He's like, yeah, I don't really drink. One night, the one time we were kind of engaging over like 6 weeks, he was kind of going through like a bit more of a tougher time. I was like, everything was great in my life. It was a really nice time for me. But there was one night where I had like, you hit the edge. I'm like crying on my stairs. I'm like, I'm tired, like the little breakdown moment. Mm-hmm. And he said, you want me to call you later for some holding for some love? I was like, yes. And it's the only time I had like wanted it really from him in that way, had opened myself to him. And we get on the phone later and he's like, oh, I'm just walking to go get a beer. And it was like my whole body went, because it was so out of the realm of what I had expected, right? And everything came flooding back around my ex and I thought, I was like, it was, so naive of me. I was like, I thought I was done with this. Like, I thought I was over it. Yeah. But no, I just haven't had the trigger recently in my life. And so it was really good for me to feel and face that with myself. But where I came to was like, that is a no for me. I don't want to have to deal with that trigger forever just because it is partially my shit. It also is a no for like what the bigness and the stability of what I want to create. And I think that's important with boundaries, is that we can actually say that's just like a no for me in this type of relationship. If we're going to create this, I'm, and which is different than if you're with someone and it already is arising, right? It's a totally different thing. But like, now that I know, and I can hold that really neutrally and loving and not go back on it.
Mm-hmm. I know that feeling you're referencing. It's almost like, for me, like the bottom just drops out all of a sudden and you're like, huh, oh God.
Yeah.
I thought that there was a floor there. And
yeah.
Turns out, nope, I'm the floor.
Yeah, really. Yeah, I was like mad at God for a second. I was like, he's supposed to be different. Like, that was like the feeling. And it was like, it was so perfect to just be with all of that and see where I had also put him in a place of perfection where he wasn't allowed to, like, in his mind, he's like, he knew that it was, he then admitted to me later, he had some deep addiction and patterning in his life in the past. And he's like, got a lot of it under control, but like, it's still there. But, it was like one beer. It wasn't actually that big of a deal. And in his life, not a huge deal. But in my way that I had made him to be this, like, you're never going to be the source of any of my pain, I'm doing better. It's like, no. People will always like
fail you.
Yep. They'll always fail us, especially because everyone is human and that's how it is. That's actually kind of the beauty of loving, right?
Sucks, but it also, I don't know if I would have it any other way now that I think about it, because I guess that's another perspective to touch on, is like boundaries with yourself is really where it starts. And like, through ALA, actually, like I learned a ton about being in integrity with myself. And if I say I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it. Because if I don't, and I break my word to myself, that just hurts me. And like, being in integrity and being on time for things, respecting yourself and others, and knowing what your values are and living in accordance with those values. And, it doesn't matter what they are. They can be whatever you want. But, like, I don't know. Have you worked with boundaries with yourself in any big ways lately?
Not necessarily. I think there's a lot of people who share this, but there's kind of two ways I look at integrity. And that's kind of where I want to start, is like, there's masculine integrity, which is commitments in your word, time, follow through.
Yeah.
And then there's feminine integrity, which is honoring the truth of what is. which changes.
Yeah.
And this is it's like people float from like, it's not like what I feel like. This is what people think feminine integrity is, right? Like, I don't feel like going, so I'm not going to go, which is like just kind of flaky, versus like you show up because you said you would, and there's like actually a middle. It's almost like a different dimension, right? It's not on the same thing. It's like,
Not either or.
is it true? Yeah, because, and this actually goes back to boundaries with myself, because the way I look at it is, what do I need for myself in order to feel open and generous? So like if I am feeling exhausted or depleted, or if I'm noticing I'm feeling disconnected from the depth of me, can I make adjustments to start to tend to that? So if it's like practices that it's like I haven't been doing as much, can I make like subtle adjustments, but only from a place of like, it's now true to do it, not from a place of I should be doing this in order to feel good about myself. Because that's where I think a lot of people start building a sense of self that isn't always connected to the truth. It's like you can keep your word and abandon yourself in keeping your word all the time. You can abandon the truth in keeping your word all the time. And so it's like kind of a slowing down to think, like, for example, if there was something I committed to with someone and the day arises and I am like, I just really don't want to go and do it, I'll sit with like, what would I need to feel really open to doing that? And sometimes I can like create that for myself. And it's like, I go, maybe I need more time, maybe whatever. And then if it's like, I really don't want to do it, I'm like, this person actually deserves the full generous version of me. So if I can't be that, then it's actually in service to like renegotiate, basically. Huh. Right. And I think that's the piece why people don't love feminine integrity, because it requires a lot more communication and responsibility with the truth. Like for me to actually hold and say like, 2 days ago, I had a massive sort of energetic wave and my head was killing me. And I had a client call later and I said, like, it wouldn't be in service to hold you later today because of how I'm feeling, like I just can't do it the way that would be actually in service to you. So we're going to have to switch it. And so it wasn't like about me again, right? So it's like almost like a boundary with myself, but it's actually never really about myself in some way, if that makes sense.
About everybody involved.
Yeah. And when you start just like operating that way, like some people aren't used to it, right? Like some people are like, whoa, but people respond really well when you don't make it this like, I'm so sorry. It's just like, it's like you start reorienting them to the same template of value.
Well, and especially if you renegotiate and you propose a new way that let's make this work. I just can't make this work. It's like,
totally.
We're negotiating. We're always negotiating. It's a lawyer in me.
Yeah, totally. And negotiating is oftentimes like sometimes harder than just like doing it anyway. And so that's the piece to feel into is like, am I doing this because it would just be easier and I also will feel like good about myself? Or am I doing it because it's true? It's still true for me to do that.
And I'm always honored when people do that with me, because I'm like, thank you for feeling comfortable and like open enough to be honest with me, because I want you to be comfortable. I want us both to be comfortable, and I want us both to like grow closer in our connection and not further apart. And I don't want you to have to force yourself to go to lunch with me. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah, no one wants someone there who's like, oh God, gotta go meet Katie now. I'm like, fuck. If you have any bit of that, right? I'm like, no. And it actually reminds me of like this post I made on Facebook recently that was like, if you don't find me fucking really funny and you don't love my blunt honesty and my sometimes like judgmental bitch, you shouldn't work with me. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, like I only want people to come in who are open to that level of my authenticity, because there are enough people in this world who are in friendship, in partnership, in work, that like when that is a yes, there's so much more of me that can be present in a connection, which just makes it so much fucking bigger and better.
What are some common boundary issues that you work with your clients about? Or are there any common themes?
You know what's so funny? Like, no. I'm like, actually, it's hilarious because I'm like, this is so interesting. Like boundaries will come up, like we'll adjust and talk about them. But I think because boundaries are actually I'm so fucking good at them in my life. I'm gonna just be honest. Like, and not because okay, this is actually interesting. Something that I want to talk about because yes.
Preach, girl.
Preach, girl. Ready for it. Spicy coming in. Okay. So like I'm good at boundaries and my life doesn't require me to set boundaries all the time because the way I hold that energetically in my body, my life it fits. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. So it's like, I'm not really good at boundaries. Like I have to have all these hard conversations all the time. It's that it's actually become so fine-tuned that boundaries aren't really a thing, which I think exists within my clients because we tune them up here and there in such a way that we actually don't have to work on boundaries. You know, like it's not like a big fucking thing.
It's a way of being.
Yes, it's a way of being. Which brings me to this thought because and it's like super relevant literally from yesterday. There's a man who posted on Facebook and he is a coach mostly for men sort of in the like masculine, feminine space in relationships. And he had this post that was like, I think it said something like, I feel like I just won the like Olympic gold medal in like the Dancing with the Feminine X Games. And he's like, I just had a hard conversation with my ex-wife, my ex-partner, my current lover. Then I held 2 women friends in their process. And then my son in his heartbreak process. And I'd feel exhausted, but the skill was there. The grace was there. And he was being playful with it. But also there was this energy of like, and he's like, I feel triumphant,
Like, I'm the man. Yeah.
And I was like, and then he's like turning that into like a pitch to work with him on like how great he is at like working with women or being in a relationship. Like I can tell by your face, you're like, something feels a little off about that, right? Like
you're on it, but
yeah. So I'll tell you what it is because I was reading it and I know him, right? So I also know the truth of him. And I think that was actually a gift because like I could really feel the contrast. I was like, ooh, like what? This feels not good in my body. And the biggest thing was like, you're equating relating with women as an extreme sport. And yet you're saying, you're saying that you know how to tend to and love the feminine. That is not incongruence, right? Like, you are basically like, we are some beast to conquer and master because we're so fucking intense and complex and we're so hard that like, as a man, you figured it out. You've cracked the code. I get it with women. And it's like, no, right? And the feminine actually, like if you feel triumphant in your exchanges with women, that's actually your ego. Feel it basically having extracted from those women to feel like you accomplished a challenge. The feminine, you do not feel triumphant after you really work with her. She is humbling as fuck. Like you will feel totally loved and nourished and but there's a sacredness to it, right? You're not on top of the mountain bragging. You are like humbled and feeling totally like almost just like, wow, it was actually a lot easier than I made it. Like the feminine as an energetic is so loving of all that is. You don't have to prove yourself to her. You don't have to master her or figure her out. Like what you have to do is actually lay yourself as you are at her feet. And she's like, honey, I'm right here.
Love on you.
Yeah. And as women, right? Like all I want is for men to like let themselves be seen as they are, good, bad, ugly, messy. And I can love that. It's like instinctually, I'm sure you can feel it. It's like when a man is just himself, it doesn't matter what stage he's at. When he is himself, it's beautiful. As soon as he tries to be anything other than the exact self he is in that moment, that's what we go, oh, like that's what like irks us. And so when I was reading his post, I was also like, not only are you actually using the feminine to feel good about yourself, so you're actually not in service to her, your life is exhausting, right? Like you're actually feeling like a master. A master of relating does not have to have fucking 5 hard conversations with women in one day, right? Like the actual fact that the fire is so heated up for you that you're having like big conversation with an ex-wife and an ex-partner and a lover, I'm like, to me, that is actually not mastery, because mastery is when it is simple and just is. Mastery of your relationships. Now, relationships will always be hard, right? They're always challenging. But like mastery is when there is an ease with what is. And that just reminded me, because of the boundaries thing, is like, it's like it just becomes a way of being in the way that your life reflects that back, right? Like if you have a lot of drama in your life that you're putting out, you're not actually like a master of relationships. You're actually probably creating drama, because there is a growth opportunity for you. And a lot of the time it's because we feel really good about what, like there's a distraction in the drama. There's something here. And so, yeah, that really made me think about like the way in which we value things, because it can look like, wow, you like, you know, there were people commenting like, so great at the work you're doing. And I'm like, I actually commented on it, and I know him, and it was very high sensation for me to do it. And I said to him, you know, first I spoke as a woman. I said, it doesn't feel good in my body to read the comparison of a woman to like a extreme sport. And then as like a
student, games of all experience, like that's like the most excessive,
right? It's like comparing yourself to Rocky, and like I'm just like, dude, do you not? You've like basically equated us to battle, like, yeah. like, can we not feel the misogyny that's actually in it, while then you're wanting to teach people how to relate to us that way? So that's where it was like, there, like the feminine in me was like, you actually have to publicly intercept this, because this cannot just go out into the world. And, you know, he's not trying, like, I have so much love for him. And that's where I could actually intercept it really cleanly, was like, it's actually in deep service to him, because I know he wants to really serve women. I know that he loves women. Yeah. And this energetic is actually stopping him from doing that. And it's stopping him from receiving like true love from the woman, because it's not that hard.
Yeah. Know? It's not a forcing it. It's just a receiving. Yeah. I get that.
Yeah.
I think of it more of like, rather than in an X Games, I think of like tending a garden or something a little bit more, you know.
Yes. It's actually, you know, I think something that I just completed a program container that I held called Reunion, and it was for men and women. And this is where I feel like I kind of like cracked the code with couples, because there were couples in it, but there were also singles in it. And there were also like halves of couples in it. And the way that it was structured was that there were half the calls were as like a full group of the men and women together, where there were exercises in terms of like sharing and working with the energy of like what I was teaching. And then half the calls I was teaching the men separately and the women separately. And so it wasn't about the couple. It wasn't about the relationship. It was about truth and expression and honesty and vulnerability, and the ways that you bring that to your relationships, while being taught in ways that really connect with men and women. Because I really don't think you can teach men and women in the same way. No. Like women can receive in a different way. Men, like, and just who I was called to be for each of them was very different. So it was a really cool practice to be like literally the first call I told the men, I was like, don't be pussies. And then the first call with the women, I was like, drop down into your pussy and feel it. And I was just laughing. I'm like, this is why we're separate. Like, you know, like it's a totally different energy. And also how they relate, you know, like I'm connecting with the women on expressing their desire and holding their desire. And then I'm also actually teaching the men on how to say no to women, and how to like serve them versus please them, and their role in tending to the full desire of a woman. And it's all very different stuff. But what was so cool, like there were multiple men in the group who had never done a single lick of personal development work. Like one of them he's like an accountant from a farming family in Iowa. And he's like, when we go into breakout rooms at work, he's like, I log off. And like the first breakout room, I had them in one-on-ones with like my deepest desire is. Like it was so far out of his element. But one of the huge takeaways for me, especially like on our last call where there was some deep reflection and just like sharing from each other to each other, was that it doesn't matter if you can like make 15 minutes like uninterrupted eye contact of intimacy, or if you can speak like some like poetic man about like the consciousness of a woman's soul flowering. It was like we had guys who were like nervous, couldn't really look at the camera, and are just saying like, I'm so grateful to my wife for bringing me here. And like it was like the most penetrative love in a package that in a lot of the work that we paint isn't what women want. Women want the like expression. And it's like, yeah, I'm like, we actually don't. We want a man who's devoted to us, who's open, who trusts us, who loves us, right? It's like who fucking waters the garden.
Who's authentic. Yeah.
Yes. I'm like, you fumbling over your words and trying to hold back tears and not looking at the camera because you're scared you're going to cry because men don't cry is actually the most beautiful thing. I don't need you sobbing like, I love her so much, right? Like it's actually equal. If they're both authentic, they're actually equal in terms of impact. And so there's so much like of this work that men go to do that I'm like, you don't actually need to master this. You need to be fucking honest with yourself and us. Like it's so much simpler than, and women need to, okay, here I am preaching. Women need to, men need to. I got a little excited, but like
your invitation is
right. We invite you to. I think that women want that from men. They think they want that from men because their level of receptivity of a man's love is narrow. It fits into that, right? It's like, I need him to tell me how beautiful I am. I need him to see all these parts of me. And not to say none of this is wrong. Like this is all, like we all want that, right? But it's almost like I won't be able to feel his love unless it's in these conditions. Versus when we drop down into our bodies and start to work on our opening, we're able to receive in many different ways. Like one of the women in Reunion, she wants to go to this like family retreat with her husband and her son. And he's also one of the men who's like, this is like such a stretch for him. And they're building a house right now, and she's about to give birth to her second baby in like 2 months. The retreat's in September.
A lot going on there.
Yeah, right? And so her work, right? So she has this deep desire for it. She's like, my whole body lit up, but it is going to be tight financially. Like she started going into that. And I said, look, let yourself feel this desire. Bring it to him. Bring it to him as full as it is. Put it on the altar of your relationship. Let it be. Now he, of course, went into, it's not his thing, right? So like, that's one thing. So then, and his mind goes to the money, the timing, and he's like, I don't think it's going to work. And so he goes into all of that, and she immediately starts to feel deflated. And what I said was like, he's actually tending to your family in the ways that he should, as like, if we're looking at, a beautiful masculine feminine dynamic right now, him caring about the money and the time and the safety of your family is actually in his design. And so instead of feeling like that's a shutdown, can you actually receive his love in that way right now, in such a way that you can still hold your desire open and allow your desire to lead him into feeling more safe while figuring out a way to make it happen.
Right.
That's what our desire can do. But you can't shut down, right?
Right. And I can see where the opposite would be destructive, where, oh, yes, honey, whatever you want all the time becomes chaotic. And then the woman's actually in the lead rather than,
yes. Totally. It's the like very it's the difference between like pleasing your woman versus serving her.
Yeah.
Because I really believe like a true desire from a woman, if it's true, it's not just an ego want, right? Like I want to go spend $1 million on my hair. If there's a true thing, right? Like she feels this deep truth with like what's possible for her family. The feminine desire can be a really beautiful leader, but it actually needs all of the masculine like gifts to support creating that in a way that is actually sustainable and achievable. And so him in his hesitation, it's actually the thing that needs to come in with her desire in order for them as a team to create what needs to happen in their family for that to happen in a responsible way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it does. And for them to feel each other's love in
Yeah.
of those two forces. Yeah, it's beautiful. Sounds like they have a cool relationship, and
They do. And she's been working with me for like 2.5 years. I'm actually going to be, she's had one baby with me, then her second one's coming. And so I'd never met him. And so like for 2 years, she's like going this huge feminine journey. And like, I could just tell by the way that he supports her in his way of just like, I love you, babe. You do you, you know, that they have a really beautiful dynamic in love. And so it was really amazing to have him come into the space and stretch himself and open to like a little bit more without having to be any different than he is. You know?
yeah. And he definitely sounds like he stretched himself by going into that whole container in the first place.
Totally.
This is my thing, but I love you. I'll do it for you.
Right. It's like such a beautiful devotion to your woman, you know, like, okay, let's go. I'm terrified. Yeah. Let's do it.
Proud of him.
Yeah.
So as we come to close, I want to invite you to share anything else you want to share. And then also, do you have openings for clients to work with you? Tell us about anything having to do with that.
No, there's nothing else actually I want to share. This feels really beautifully like rounded and complete. I think the best way, or like the piece that's really coming through a lot right now, is around the really like orienting ourselves to like deep harmony between men and women in a way that honors the truth versus like how we adjust to get what we want in our relationships with men and women. And, you know, which is really the premise of Reunion, which is the group program that I just finished. And I'm going to be running a second round, probably end of August, starting maybe September. So it is for men and women, couples or not. It's like you're all on your own track. But really for couples, like what I really saw happen was like a shared context for the way that like we are willing to start saying the truer thing to each other and then seeing what comes forth and meeting that because we hold our relationship sacred, which is like really the premise. And then for people who are not in partnership, it's like actually holding every relationship that's sacred and being willing to practice saying the truest thing and receiving the truth from people in such a way that like relationships feel rich and connected. And so that has, right now there's just a wait list for anyone who wants to hear about it because I haven't opened the doors for it yet for the round 2. But they can find me on Instagram and Facebook. And then also I am doing one-on-one work as well with men and women on really like deepening their connection to their body and to themselves to really create an energetic foundation. Because if you can't feel, like all of this stuff can just be used by your mind, right? As like a strategy. But really it's like there's so much that we can orient inside to really support all of what we're doing in our relationships in like a really true and authentic way.
I love it.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing all of your beautiful wisdom with us.
Thank you for having me. It's been so much fun. I loved it.